Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and most importantly, children and young people at the heart of this gathering. It is my distinct privilege to join you today from New York for the 10th International Policy Conference on the African Child. My name is Vanessa Frazier, and just this week I took up my appointment as the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. I bring to this position decades of experience in consensus building, crisis management, and complex global negotiations, a skill set urgently required to address the deep crisis experienced by children in conflict around the globe. Ensuring that the rights of the most vulnerable, especially children, are protected and their voices heard has been at the center of my work. This was especially true during my recent tenure as the permanent representative of Malta to the United Nations, during which I chaired the United Nations Security Council Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict. It is my honor to now act as the UN's leading global advocate for the protection of conflict-affected children. You have my full commitment, and I look forward to building strong partnerships with all of you. I thank the African Child Policy Forum for organizing this important event and for the meaningful collaboration over the years, which I am committed to taking forward. I further appreciate the fruitful cooperation with other partners on the continent, especially with member states, the African Union, regional economic communities and mechanisms, and the African Committee of Experts on the Right of the Child and Welfare of the Child, a broad network of NGOs and civil society, and, of course, children and young people themselves. This year's theme of the conference is adolescence, meaning children and young people between 10 and 19 years of age, a timely and important focus. Adolescents in Africa make up a quarter of the continent's population, while the total generation of children accounts for almost half of all inhabitants. By 2055, Africa's child population is expected to reach 1 billion members. Nowhere in the world are children more vital to a continent's future. Yet, too often they remain unprotected and excluded. I speak today from the vantage of my mandate, which was created because the world had failed too many children before and continues to fail them today. Under my leadership, the United Nations monitors, verifies, and reports on the 6 grave violations against children in conflict that have been identified by the UN Security Council. These are the recruitment and use, killing and maiming and abduction of children, rape and other forms of sexual violence against them, attacks on schools and hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian access. In addition, the detention of children for their alleged association with parties to conflict and the military use of schools and hospitals are monitored. As documented in the 2025 report of the Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict, the situation was particularly grim last year, with grave violations reaching unprecedented levels. Worldwide, the United Nations verified 41,370 violations committed against 22,495 children, a third of them girls. These numbers present a staggering 25% surge in grave violations compared to the previous year, the highest level ever recorded. My mandate covers 22 country situations and 1 regional situation across all continents. Out of these, 14 situations are in Africa, where roughly half of the grave violations, 18,068, against 12,260 children were verified last year. This places the continent at the epicenter of the child's rights crisis. From the Democratic Republic of the Congo to Sudan, Nigeria to Somalia, the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin, children are recruited, used, killed, maimed, abducted, raped, detained, and denied the most basic services. Non-state armed groups carry out nearly half of the violations, but government forces remain the leading perpetrators of killing, maiming, and the denial of humanitarian access. The recruitment and use, killing and maiming, and abduction of children were particularly prevalent across the continent, with each violation verified at close to 5,000 cases. In addition, over 1,300 children, most of them girls, were raped or subjected to other forms of sexual violence, often repeatedly and with severe brutality, including in cases of gang rape. Adolescents are highly exposed to such pressures from conflict and, unsurprisingly, represent the age group most affected by grave violations. And too often, they are not adequately protected by legal and policy frameworks. They tend to fall between child rights and adult structures, leaving them vulnerable and unsupported. They also face the additional threat of being deprived of their liberty on the basis of their association with armed groups, and are routinely treated as threats rather than right holders and the primary victims of conflict. What does this look like in practice? A 16-year-old boy might be forcibly recruited and used in combat by an armed group, and, at the time of capture or release, detained by authorities and prosecuted as an adult. A 15-year-old girl might be abducted from her school, raped by a soldier, and then threatened to stay silent, shamed by her community, and left without any support. It is likely that she will never return to school, her dreams shattered. A group of displaced adolescents might be denied access to education, healthcare, or other basic services, excluded by a system supposed to support them. Sadly, these are the daily realities of thousands of children trapped in conflict. In addition, I am concerned by threats in the digital sphere, particularly to adolescents, as the prime users of digital tools. Armed actors are increasingly using online spaces, especially social media, to target children and young people, including for recruitment and use and sexual violence. We urgently need to ensure that digital spaces benefit and do not harm this generation. With the participation and leadership of young people in Africa, my office launched in 2024 a social media campaign on digital safety for conflict-affected children, a first step to address this emerging threat in the work under my mandate. Excellencies, colleagues, young people, the situation of conflict-affected children is devastating, but it is not hopeless. We have the tools to end this scourge at our disposal. First, let us ensure that child protection is not an isolated issue, but at the core of all peace, security, and development efforts, including in conflict prevention, early warning, and mediation. My office has been working with member states and regional organizations, most notably the African Union and regional economic communities, to mainstream children and armed conflicts in mediation and early warning, and to draw up national and regional prevention plans to stop grave violations from occurring in the first place. In fact, I have just launched the second phase of a regional project with the support of the UN Peace and Development Trust Fund to take this agenda forward. Second, child protection systems at global, regional, national, and local levels must be strengthened and adequately resourced. This ranges from ensuring the continued monitoring and reporting on grave violations to enhance legal protections and accountability, to providing assistance programs including reintegration, education, healthcare, and psychosocial support. Securing financing for these types of interventions is especially important at a time of shifting global priorities. At this moment, protection systems are shrinking while violations are rising. This is a dangerous trend that we must reverse. Third, we need strong partnerships. There is great potential that can be unlocked by increasing regional cooperation on children and armed conflict. This also means teaming up on advocacy and demonstrating clearly that the protection of children and young people in conflict matters to all of us. On this note, I would like to highlight that my office has launched a new global advocacy campaign called Prove It Matters, which uses creative tools to advocate for the basic rights of children, particularly in situations of armed conflict. It is being implemented with the participation of thousands of children around the globe. I encourage you to join this campaign, whether you represent a member state, a child protection organization, or are a child yourself. And last but not least, the voices of children and youth have to be centered. Children and adolescents do not only need protection, but recognition and a seat at the table. This is especially true for girls, displaced and refugee children, children with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. Participation is a right, not a privilege, and young people's needs and ideas should be the driver behind all collective efforts. Adolescents in Africa are a rising generation whose choices and chances will shape the continent and the world. Their well-being is foundational to peace and security, as well as to development and innovation. Excellencies, colleagues, children, and youth African leaders and civil society have a proud track record of creating concerted pushes for the protection of children and were instrumental in the creation of my mandate. Similarly, this conference has long shaped continental agendas. Let this edition mark the moment when Africa leads the world in centering adolescents as full rights holders and as architectures of the future. I am delighted by the diversity of speakers and agenda items over the next 2 days and wish you fruitful discussions and tangible outcomes. Thank you for your kind attention.